Welcome everybody to another New Year's essential conversation here with me and Dr. Alex, and it's great to be here with you. And today we're going to talk about New Year's resolutions, how they go, and then new orientations to promote intimacy, and how to take the stress out of Valentine's Day and move towards sort of deeper connections with our beloveds. So, Doc, welcome.
Hi, Nigel. I'm well, and Happy New Year to you, which sounds like a funny thing to say on February 3rd. At least February 3rd in Los Angeles. I guess 4th there, right?
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had I wanted to bring up this subject today, based on a lot of the chat in our groups around, this understanding around growth and getting to know yourself and orientating to set resolutions that are doable, and that in this case a lot of the times it was about how to get more intimate with themselves and with the people that they love. And some of them, it's like it's a something that can be very superficial and then be easily forgotten, is what some of them have said. And just wanting to understand and maybe explore today, just what can a New Year's resolution or a new orientation towards intimacy with self and other look like?
Well, I think the idea of being resolved can sound a lot like willpower. And for people in recovery, they know that willpower does not get you very far, because you're really trying to recruit the brain in a particular way against these deeper impulses, and it becomes a losing battle. So I like to think about, what are my intentions for the new year? And holding an intention is something that we hold sort of broadly, and it's not resolute. So resolution sounds like black and white. If I fall off the wagon, then I'm done. And usually by this time of year, it's just a month later, oddly. I mean, you and I were just commenting that it already feels like we're into spring, and the New Year has passed us by, but it's really just a month later. How is that resolve holding up? And would this be a good time, the 1st of February, to rethink those and to say, what are actually my intentions? So if I'm resolving that I am going to be a nicer parent, and that means I'm not going to yell at my kids or be short with them, and then something happens and I do, then I'm a bad person, or I blew my resolution. So now I'm just going to be a raving lunatic the rest of the year. As opposed to, if my intention is to be kinder, a better parent, and I do lose my temper, I repair it with my child. I say I'm sorry, but what they were doing was not okay. And I sort of pick myself back up and say, okay, how can I put more of my attention on this intention and do better next time? So that I'm sort of building on a process. I'm not in this black and white, right or wrong, I'm a good person, bad person duality.
Yeah, I love that. And you just touched on something there around. I love that, like, to get out of that either or mentality, where we can, okay, we're all imperfect. We will, like, we had someone in addiction recently in residence here, and he was talking about how he, before he came, he in his mind, he relapsed, and it was such a bad thing, but it was just information. It was like, okay, well, we need some more things added into the lifestyle, or some things taken out, or we need more support. It's just information. It's not the end of the world. But you touched on something there, Doctor, about in intimate relationships, that I have seen in the last month, in the couples work that we've been doing, and some couples groups that we've done, is this, and this is what a few of them had orientated for or had intentions to do, which was to come out of the bickering, come out of the angry exchanges, the power dynamics, the I'm right, you're wrong, which is a intimacy killer. Curious, what would be a new way to think of that, of how to come into a new orientation around that sort of power dynamic of needing to be right?
Well, would you rather be right or would you rather be in your relationship? Would you rather be loving? And to notice when those power struggles start to escalate and to ask yourself, what am I doing to contribute to this right now? And what exactly are we arguing about? Because oftentimes we're arguing, we want the same outcome, but we get into these power struggles about who's right and who isn't, and what you said, and I didn't say that, and yes, you did. And I think the quicker people can step out of that dynamic and apologize, whether it was your fault or not, we both have some part in the power struggle, just to apologize and say, let's just take a deep breath. And what's in the best interest of our relationship here? Is it to keep fighting like cats and dogs? Because those kind of bouts, especially when they're chronic, they really destroy the foundation of a relationship. And then people start hating each other, they have contempt, and that's it. The relationship's over at that point.
Yeah, when we get into that contempt place, it's a difficult place to come back from. When it's
Yeah, well, I think you probably know that John Gottman, who's one of the chief researchers really in the world on couples therapy, says that contempt is the death knell of a relationship. When you have disgust for the person that you're with and you're enraged at them, there's really no coming back from that ledge. And it takes a lot of, anger and disconnect to get there, but people get there. And unfortunately, a lot of people stay in those relationships till the day they die. They just hate each other till the day they die, and that's their relationship.
yeah,
But there's nothing about that that's good for your immune system or your longevity. It's certainly a massive heartbreak, and that leads to heart disease. It's all connected.
yeah,
So, how can I give up being right? How can I have the humility to say I'm sorry? And can we start again?
yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful, and even let's just imagine that we move from the couple towards the self. For the people watching, like, are you hostile? Are you impatient with yourself? Are you or others? Are you critical? Are you angry? Are you agitated, irritated? This sort of hostility that's always floating. This is how can we remedy that sort of nervous system, physical impact on our body over years? And you just named it there, Doc, which is affection and empathy and connection. Because when we're hostile, there's no space for, there's a believed, perceived, when we're in that state, there's no actual empathy, or affection doesn't exist when we're in those sorts of cocoons in our own mind. And
Yeah, well, you just said something. It really is an altered state of consciousness. And we think of altered state of consciousness as some sort of woo-woo thing. But, rage is an altered state of consciousness. You no longer have the capacity to think and reason at that point. You've just got high activation in the nervous system. And at that point, you're a predator, because we're predators first and foremost. So if you're going to run your relationship from a predator standpoint, that's what you're going to get back, because we're geared towards protecting ourselves and fighting. And that releases massive neurohormones in the brain and the body that when they're chronically released, break down our immune systems. Cortisol is there as an alarm bell for us to fight, flee. Adrenaline also. It's designed to move the body and move us out of harm's way. But if you're just living in that state, you can bet that you're wreaking havoc on your other systems, because it's poison. It doesn't need to be there all the time. It's like if
yeah,
you were putting gasoline not in the tank of your car, but pouring it into the oil filter and all of the hoses and everything else, you would destroy the car.
Yeah, it's, for me, I have one. I have two groups that I run, and they're all the group is it's cardiovascular disease. That's why they come. It's
Mm,
they're all they've either had a heart attack, or they've been told they're going to get one, or they've got a stent in, or they've had a bypass in. And
right.
common denominator with everybody who comes in, they all have free floating hostility. It's that type A male behavior,
Yeah.
time urgency, stuff more things into already overly stuffed pockets,
Mhm.
and that really affects the quality. And then everybody in those groups, they really struggle with intimacy with their beloved.
Well, I was going to say, how many of them also have broken hearts
Yeah,
from early, early on, like early childhood? So, for example, my father was a trauma survivor. I've written about this, that he grew up during the Nazi occupation of his island in Greece, and he had untreated PTSD. And he had heart disease, starting in his 50s,
yeah.
many coronary bypass surgeries, a pacemaker. It was all heart centered because of his brokenheartedness.
Mm.
Now, that wasn't the only reason. There are clear physiological, real issues here as well. But a lot of these type A men are running so hard because it's a survival mechanism. So, getting to the heart of the matter, if you will, is a lot of the work that they need to do.
Yeah, and that's we have another group is transgenerational haunting. So then the first and second generations of I come from Northern Ireland. I was brought up in a war. My
That's
parents were
right.
in the war. My grandparents would have been in World War II. There's people that are surviving the Holocaust, that or people who have witnessed 9/11. All these impact us in a way that, and if it's the further back atrocities, it's the second and third generations that pay the price, where they, as you said, that hostility is there. Yes, there's stuff to look at,
Yeah.
and what does transgenerational, we're going a wee bit off track here, but again, it's just this sort of transmission that wants to be witnessed, that third was never there, that other was never there, that affection, that empathy. Again, this remedy, which is presence, and connection, and sort of seeing and being curious of these sorts of hauntings that are handed down through families, that show up in illnesses, they show up with mental health, they show up with relational styles. It's quite, and I didn't know that about you, Doc, that your
Huh.
dad had that. That's well, like that must have been really tough for him through his life, to have to go through that, and then also having to carry some of that transmission within yourself.
Yeah, I wasn't until my 40s where I realized that Hitler's trauma was in my body. It
Yeah.
just never occurred to me. I mean, Jewish people know that, but I didn't know that, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And Gabor Mate writes about this. There's a very chilling statement that he makes, sort of famous at this point, where his mother could not soothe him as a baby. He was just crying, 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 and she called the doctor, and the doctor said to her, "All of my Jewish babies are crying right now." Because the mothers were in such a hyper aroused, anxious state of survival, they couldn't regulate their infants. So there is the intergenerational transmission. It's not just psychological, it is neurobiological. These anxious mothers couldn't regulate their babies, so their babies end up being anxious, drug addicts, alcoholics, you name it. And these are, not just genetic, but what they call epigenetic factors. So our genes, we're born with a gene set, but the genes will express depending on the environmental cues that they're getting. So you might have a predilection towards, or let's say you've got a genetic makeup towards even alcoholism. But if you grow up in a stable, secure household, that's not likely to express. If you grow up under high stress, it will express as alcoholism. And that's true for, schizophrenia and other major mental illnesses. Um, there's a famous story here in the States that was on a national public radio show where there's a neuroscientist at a university here, and he very famously studied sociopaths. And he was doing fMRIs of all these sociopaths' brains, and he was seeing that they had very low gray matter in the high right area of the brain. And so he fMRI'd his own brain one day also. And he was days later, he's sitting at his desk and he's holding up films to the light and he's looking at one after the other. And he looks at this one and he's like, wow, this guy's really, got this problem. And then he looked at the name on the film and it was his own. So he called his mother and he said, wow, this is really weird and disturbing. And she said, well, I've never told you this, but Lizzie Borden, who's a famous murdering character in American, history. She was a butcher. She was a sociopath, essentially, was in his father's ancestry. So
Wow.
intergenerationally, he had this deficit. But because he grew up in a sane and stable household, he became a neuroscientist, not an axe murderer. And when he told his colleagues this, they all said to him, yeah, you're a little weird. You're a little off. So
well, wonderful to see this, the transmissions trying to come out, and the generations can sometimes want to, be healers as well, as part
yes.
of, as an interesting.
But if this guy had been beat as a child, he would have been a prisoner.
Yeah.
He would have been vicious and violent, no empathy, no compassion, because that area of the brain was diminished significantly genetically.
Wow. Yeah. So for me, it's, there was a few people entered into these groups this year just as their New Year's resolutions to be curious about these sorts of artifacts in their family, these sorts of styles that sort of that they were curious about, and they wanted to get to know themselves more in the process.
Right.
So that's a beautiful thing. And when I think about New Year's resolutions, there was another little lady, a lovely older woman, and she was saying, how can I be consistently intimate with myself? Like,
That's
how
a
can
beautiful
I,
question.
and I says, well, let's not get overly reliant on me. I was joking with her. I says, let's open it up to the group. And there was so many, the mixture of responses, from, physical sort of health being an intimate orientation to meditation through to walks in the park. And, but I'm curious what comes alive with that question, Doc, with you and your experience with your clients.
Well, I think silence and solitude are the biggest pathways to this intimacy with oneself. So meditation practices, walking meditation, time alone, really, both so we can hear our internal dialogue and all these crazy thoughts that run, but also as we start to recognize ourselves and the beauty around us, the magnitude of the mountains or the ocean or the strength of the land, we start to, that's reflected back to us as our very own self. And we start to see that we're not separate from creation, from the universe, that we are as beautiful as any flower or tree or ocean, that there's a vastness in that we can't ever really touch. And I think when we get connected to that longing to dive deeper into ourselves, to know ourselves deeply, that is true love. That's a love that can't be taken. It's not dependent on something outside of ourselves. And that's really, I think, the path to any kind of, quote, spiritual awakening. So, I often talk about being your own best lover, being your beloved. And then you have something to bring to another. You're not depending on them to make you feel good or validated or sexy or smart or any of those other things. You already know these things about yourself. And you also, realistically, know your limitations, know where your Achilles heel is. It's not about being just so fabulous, you're infallible. It's not that. It's saying, I know who I am, and these are my triggers. This is where I can really fall apart, and I have some tools for that, but This is what I know about myself. It's sort of like saying, I want to give you what my colleague says is the owner's manual. I want you to know what you're buying.
Mhm.
It's like what we would call informed consent.
Yeah, what are you getting yourself into here?
Yeah, well, let me tell you what you're getting yourself into. This is what I know about myself. As opposed to, you should be a mind reader, you should figure it out, you should just know.
I remember in the old days,
Mm,
I read the old book of Harville Hendrix and his wife, and and I came in the first dates with my girlfriend and said, "Okay, well, this is what you're getting yourself in for. This is my exit strategies. This is the way that and it was wow. Like I didn't often get a second date with some of them, but it
Well, it's
was.
probably not a good first date.
I know I was overly excited about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's getting to know yourself, um, and spending time in the real, bottom up approach to, which is being on the land and really connecting to the
Yeah.
earth. Yeah, beautiful.
And having the humility to admit these things to ourselves. David White, the poet, often says that the root word of the word humility is humiliation.
Mm,
And how many times have we been humiliated in our lives? He gives a great example of just getting caught in a rainstorm in Ireland and being soaking wet and showing up at somebody's house. There is a humiliation in being like a wet rag when you show up at the door. And there's a humility to that too. It's like, well, here I am.
yeah.
Um, right.
Wow. Well,
So I love that notion of, can I be humble enough to be vulnerable enough to be honest with myself?
mhm. Yeah, because a major theme that kills intimacy that came up in this kind of like a share just before we get stuck into the process work was
Mhm.
this understanding around, which is the opposite of what you're talking about, which is displaying versus revealing. The revealing
Mm,
being the more humility a little bit,
I like that.
and and this sort of dynamic around how you really invalid exchange in those moments, because there's displays, and in the displays, like the old-fashioned hysteric character structure, we put people in the audience, and in that, there's a defensiveness, and and it promotes loneliness and distance, because you know nobody really knows who you are, and if you do that enough times, it also promotes isolation because it's exhausting
Yeah, yeah.
having to overdo it. And
Mhm.
what you're talking about, which is beautiful, which is more about how can we reveal more around our ordinary worst parts to the world,
Yeah.
to the people who matter, and how less pressure it is to be more than when we allow ourselves to be ordinary and imperfect.
Yeah, and if we don't think about them as our worst parts, we just think about them as part of who we are. Because we have to make peace with these parts of ourselves first. If I'm clubbing myself constantly or calling myself names, there's no way I can reveal to you what the problem is. So, for example, I grew up in a household where my mother was pretty anxious and everything had to be perfect. And she had a little bit of an obsessive compulsive personality. And the good news is I'm super organized, I'm efficient, I get things done. But with that comes an impatience. And, when I didn't understand that that's what it was, I always felt bad inside, like I was bitchy or demanding, or I was ashamed of it. I didn't realize I was ashamed of it. And so when I started to recognize that, oh, this is the good with the bad, I can balance a checkbook and run my life as an adult. There were no messes in my household, which is really a skill to give your kids. But God, you can't relax in that either. So when I realize that I'm impatient with the people that I'm closest to, and I notice my anxiety starting to come up, or I want to be judgmental, I can say to myself, you know what? Just take a breath, give that person the dignity of their process, as they say in AA, and just chill out, right? And don't trammel on top of them. And that makes my relationships go a lot better. And, the people closest to me know that I'm going to say, let's cut to the chase, right? Like, get on with it because of my impatience. So that's an example of it. But until we make friends with it, until we're accepting and kind to ourselves, we can't really share it with other people.
Exactly, because it's like it's hidden in the shame and the guilt
That's right.
crevice of
And
our.
then and then it comes out as an argument. If you and I are in a relationship, I would say to you, well, you know what, Nigel, I'm just a bitch sometimes, so get over it. Where do you go with that? Right? Great. Well, I'm super happy that I met you. And now I have to live with this. You forgot to tell me that, in the falling in love swooning stage.
Yeah.
As opposed to me knowing and being kind and saying, look, I really struggle with this impatience. And when you have a process maybe where you need to take time and think about things, I'm over here crawling out of my skin. So how do we work together with these two differences as opposed to I'm better than you or I'm right and you're wrong and all of that?
Yeah, I think this is, you're touching on to another point that was raised that's very important around New Year's orientations that promote
Mhm.
intimacy, and it's like, well, you shared something wonderful and vulnerable. One of the things that I struggled with for a long time was needing to fix stuff, you
Oh,
know,
that's so male of you. But yes.
and I remember my wife saying to me one time, just, can you let me have my process?
Right.
Can you let me have my feelings for once? Can I just bloody feel? It was the best bit of supervision I ever got.
Ever. That's great.
Because then I was realizing, like, wow, like this is like I wasn't able, at that time I wasn't able to enter into the relational field and just sit with her in whatever it was, her distress or her
Mhm.
worry, without having to go. And so here's me sharing with you my my struggle. And if
Right.
we're in a relationship and you've shared yours, then how, this is what I try to do with my partner, which is how to love these ordinary parts of my partner, even at times better than them, to
That's
to
great.
hold to hold them in mind, and
Mhm.
to be there, also knowing that there is a part of the partner that will feel guilt or shame about it. And I ain't going to be helping, first of all, if I'm adding to that. And how
Right.
can it be helpful to support a different view when she's maybe in that place as well? So, how can I? And for me, that's what love is in one
Mhm.
orientation of my mind, is accepting the other as they are, sometimes better than they can. And now that is not easy, but
No.
it's a lovely lifelong goal in a relationship.
Right, and that's an intention, and that is just beautiful. I've never heard anybody put it that way before. It's kinda stunningly beautiful and very challenging. How can I love that person's imperfections more than they do? How can I give them a space? So if I'm impatient and your wife has this process and I'm in relationship with her, while she's over there struggling with her process, taking her time, and I'm sitting on the sidelines with my knee shaking because I know what the answer is and I just want her to hurry up and get there. Even if I don't say anything, that tension is in the space between us. As opposed to, I really have to hold my horses,
Yeah.
and I have to hold that person in a loving, intentionality.
And the only way to do that is to be able to do that with your own, you
That's
know.
right, that's right, and also, I was just thinking, wow, that would help me heal my impatience because my partner is forcing me to stop when I don't want to, and my skin is crawling. And she's trying to move her process faster, and I'm trying to slow mine down. And together, we are actually healing these challenges that we have. So it's not just one sided. Like,
Mhm.
it's so altruistic. I'm actually getting a benefit from it too.
Yeah, yeah. There's this, this is what I taught, intimacy, and then the word that comes to, how can we exchange with one another? How can we dwell with one another? Like really
Mm,
deeply dwell in that in between space of maybe we don't know together how to do it, but we just be in it, like whatever it is.
yeah.
I have another woman, and she's um in our group, and she was sharing that, the husband has a lot of guilt and shame around his erectile dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
And the wife, who's in her 60s, has a very high sex drive. And like you can see again, it's like looks like polar opposites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where it could create a lot of dynamics, a lot of triggering, and a lot of and how can that? So the question she asked was under the subject of new orientations in the new year to promote intimacy, which was how can I not leave my sexual desires and needs, how to not abandon them, but how not to abandon the guilted and ashamed husband who's struggling in the bedroom to have an erection. And she says, like, this is what I'm trying to work out, like, because she either goes in, because I was sharing her a little bit while I was sharing, she says, but I don't want to become a caretaker. I want to, and I said, yeah, well, there's a space there in the middle that's not that. And
Yeah.
can you put words to that, Doc, in your own orientation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, she has the right idea, but they have to have conversations about what he's struggling with. And if he can't be honest with himself with what he's struggling with, then it's going to make it very difficult for them to bridge that gap. But I would ask her, what is sexually pleasing to her? How does she express her sexuality? We've had this conversation before that it's not just about penetrative sex and an erection. What are the other ways that they can make love? Through touching, through play states, through even deep, beautiful conversations that open their hearts with each other. Where is that space where they can meet, is what you're saying. And I think they have to find that together. But again, these can be really hard conversations because he may not be attracted to her. Right? And the question is why? Is it because he has this idea of what a body should look like? Is it because he can't connect with her emotionally, so he can't be in gratitude for the body she has? I mean, these are very, sort of complicated and deep questions because it's different for everybody.
Yeah, well, she's in a different season in their life than when they were married. She's 65,
Right.
and she's not as toned as she might have been when she was 25.
No,
So
she's not. Not might, but she's not.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's really good. It's like new orientations towards intimacy. Communication is a huge part of that.
Mhm.
With yourself, and honestly with yourself, and then with the other, to really
Yeah.
create those spaces that may be uncomfortable sometimes and vulnerable.
Right, and she may have to consider what she can and can't live with, and if she can't live with his dysfunction and he's not doing anything about it, then she has to decide whether this is the right place for her or not. And oftentimes people really chicken out at that juncture. What they do instead is they start badgering their partners more and more. They get angrier, but they won't leave because the truth is they're terrified to leave. They don't know who they would be without this person. They don't want to face the difficult challenges and the pain of leaving, so they prefer the pain of misery and, becoming emotional terrorists in their relationship. And that's just not okay for anybody. That just makes the chasm bigger and worse. Um, and I think that is where, again, self-deceit can play a big, big part. Where it's like, well, I'm not happy in my marriage, but I'm not going to leave because I'm too scared, but I don't want to admit that to myself.
Well, that's something you said again, Doc. I love all of that, and I love this term that you used, which is pretty much the killer. Even in the word, it sounds like a killer. Like just what kills intimacy, which is emotional terrorist in the
Right.
family, where this is so true, that this embittered sort of form of communication is just hostility all the time, and it is like
Hostility or drama or manipulation or threats. I mean, all of it. This is a term that David Snarch, who was a famous sexologist in the States, used. And I just always loved it because it's so dramatic, but it really hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And those people can often be the more self-righteous people in the relationship also.
Yeah, there'd be a touch of grandiosity possibly in there. But and again,
Yeah.
if anybody's listening or viewers here, if you're noticing you're in a it's February and you're noticing you're the emotional terrorist in the relationship, or
Mm,
there's constant drama, or there's constant bickering, or there's constant hostility in your relationship with your partner or towards your children, then there's a need for support here. There's a
yeah.
need to, and if you can't see through the clouds of fury and righteousness that you're the one who is right and everybody else is wrong, then there's a there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Support's the only way to reach out to a therapist, a counselor, to the doctor, to me here, anywhere at all, just where you don't have to be alone and suffer. And maybe in your family, that's all you saw. That's what intimacy was those sorts of negative pleasure of berating one another. But
Mm,
that's not intimacy. That's
right.
abuse.
Yeah, and it's certainly not love. And I think everyone can relate to this when you've had one of those experiences where you've just been awful. You feel terrible afterwards because you're in shame. You don't like yourself. You feel like there's something wrong with you because you know what you just did violated your values in some ways, and you don't want to be that person. And so to be able to admit that to yourself is the first step to saying, I need help. I need to talk to somebody else about this. I need to get into a men's group or a women's group and, find out, like, get my premises and my reality checked here. And it's always nice when someone says, yeah, you know what, that was out of bounds. You're right about that. As opposed to a bunch of people saying to you, oh, don't worry, or your husband's a jerk. Like, it's easy to find, for women to find or men to find their cohort that will validate their position. But do you want a bunch of yes men or yes women around you? Or do you want people around you that are actually going to challenge your perceptions, that are going to challenge you to be a better person?
And Doc, that's so wonderful, and it brings me on to another question, another New Year's orientation to that earth intimacy, which is how can I, or what do I have to do that can allow my partner to come in and be critical of something that I've done? Like, how can I?
Great question.
What do I need to do to allow more of an open space for my partner
Mhm.
to come in and say, hey, like, that's not okay. Like, what do
Right.
I need to do to make that more possible? Because I think that's the key there as well.
It is, and I think that goes back to self-responsibility. If I'm impatient and I'm in a relationship with you, I have to tell you how you can point that out to me in a way that I can hear it. Because you shouldn't have to guess and try all these different strategies and techniques,
Or
you
walk on
know?
eggshells,
That's right,
which
or walk on eggshells. It's my responsibility to say, "Hey, when you feel me being impatient," we have like a code word, or you say to me, "You know what, Alex, you're starting to do that thing, or you're starting to vibrate a little bit." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, thank you." As opposed to you're being an impatient bitch and I need you to stop. I mean, those are fighting words, right?
yeah,
So it's our responsibility again to tell our partners what we need, how we operate, how we can hear constructive criticism, even though it might feel shameful to hear it and hard to hear. And on the other side of that, it's not okay to weaponize these things against our partners. If I tell you the way I need to hear something and then you say it in a mocking tone, you're making fun of me, that is just perpetrating more violence. That's not okay either. So we have to be in an agreement that what we're doing is for our mutual growth and development and for the good of the relationship.
yeah. And a lot of the time, we all, definitely, or we all have our own histories and we all have our own wounds that. So when we go to give feedback to someone around their behavior or something that's happening, um, finding out what the triggers are is important. Knowing our own triggers, because maybe your partner sometimes might know them better than you as well. Sometimes
Right.
you might be completely oblivious to them, but it's about really getting to know yourself a little bit more. And we had a gentleman in one of our groups, and he was saying, like, I can't speak to my wife. If I say anything's wrong with the food, she says she's the worst cook, and for 25 years, I've just when she's wet, I've tried to sneak the food into the bin, and he can't say anything. That's just he says, let me just give you this as an example. This is how my relationship is, and the group asked him, like, why are you hiding in your relationship? Like, what's going on there? And he says, well, I saw my dad do that as well. My mom's cooking wasn't great either. And I said, but we're talking more than just about the food. But
Yeah.
he says, yeah, like I don't want her to leave.
Mm.
And then we helped him feel, that sort of abandonment that it's a fear of abandonment that he experienced in his own childhood.
Sure.
And by going through fear, that by leading into his own personal wounding and having people be with him and accompanying him, and he was able to have this experience. And then in the group, he was able to practice calling someone out that he didn't agree with. Instead of being so passive and so happy and presenting well, he practiced being able to differentiate. And then he brought into the relationship, and now the wife's getting cooking classes at the moment. So it's very cute to see how things can change, but you have to start to get to know yourself.
Yeah, and what a beautiful admission on his part. I mean, that's a real moment of vulnerability and getting honest with oneself, which is what we're talking about. And so when he recognizes that he's his own jailer, he's eating bad food, not because she's a bad cook, but because he's eating bad food. Like he's doing it to himself. She's not doing it to him. Then that changes the dynamic between the two of them. When he can say to her, I really appreciate the effort you make to cook every single night. And what can we do to ease some of that burden from you? Do we need to experiment with getting like an Instapot or an air fryer or some fun gadget that would make it more interesting? Maybe we could take a cooking class together, right? That there are gentler ways of starting to look at like what our preferences are. Maybe she doesn't want to do it at all anymore.
Yeah, all that is great, and I,
Mhm.
it's like it's not always the first point of reference is you know why we can't do something. Like, it's understanding what's in the way. It's like
Right.
understanding our own sort of histories that block our ability to communicate honestly and openly.
Yes, and then the solutions naturally show up.
Yeah,
Right, those solutions are not the first place you start from is with a cooking gadget, but they will come up and probably be more of a collaborative, creative endeavor also
hmm,
that brings the couple together.
yeah, and this will be a lovely segue as we're moving on sprightly in the podcast here to this. So he brought her. He's buying her this, and they talked about it. This sort of cooking experience for Valentine's Day
Mm,
as a lovely sort of gift,
right.
and that they both explored what it would be. So this is a time of the year. My wedding anniversary is Valentine's Day,
Oh,
so
that's sweet. You kill two birds with one stone, as they
I
say.
did. It was like a Balinese holy man picked it. He has no idea about Valentine's. He just picked this.
Oh,
This is the right day. So
right.
I says, thanks, man. It's this. You got.
Uses
He's on the money.
yes.
But so it is a special day for me
Mm,
personally, and in the groups, a lot of people are just like stressed out. Some of them who are wanting to really try to improve um, their intimacy at that time, and getting a bit stressed out, to be honest, around, and then often having like road wrecks of past experiences that didn't go well
Yeah.
because of the pressure that they were putting on their shoulders. So I'm curious about your understanding of what that day could be for an intimate, committed couple.
Well, I think this goes back to the co-construction of our lives. These holidays are socially constructed in large part, and then we're meant to fall in line based on what the advertisement says we're supposed to do. So you have to buy a card, you've got to buy chocolates, you've got to go on a date, and you've got to buy flowers. This is the prescription. And if you fall short of that, then the other party's disappointed. But is that really how you express your appreciation, your love, and your gratitude for your beloved? And why not have a conversation before Valentine's Day? Probably this weekend would be a good time to say, hey, what does this holiday actually mean to you? What are your expectations of me? What would you like to do? What would be a fun thing for us to do separate and apart from what we're supposed to do? And that's a mature conversation. If I'm just wanting flowers so I can tell my girlfriends I got flowers, that's a problem. Right? Because that has nothing to do with my relationship. It has to do with my Instagram photo. So, one of the things I know is that it's impossible to get a table for dinner on Valentine's Day in a city, whatever the city is. So a lot of couples will choose a day on either side of it, or maybe the weekend before or after. This idea that it has to be on the day is somewhat childish, I think. It's like when you're an adult, does Christmas Day or the day after matter to you? When you're a child, Christmas Day is everything, as it should be. So how are you defining it? What has meaning to the two of you? Sometimes just a quiet dinner at home, just acknowledging how long you've been together, what you've been through, what your intention is for this year, can be incredibly sweet and romantic and close in. So I would say that people should be very careful about the shoulds and get curious about the what is true for you and your partner.
Yeah, I think
You know,
that's very valuable. What is true? What
right.
what's real for them? What feels important? What's my individual way to lean into and feel? It's like somebody who, it's not even about buying gifts or anything like that, but like Christmas time, you can just buy something without thought. Like how to think about this time, like put some effort into the
Right.
thinking about, to get away from the prescriptive. What would your partner really like? What sort of experience would they really like?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, did last year's really work? And looking at it compassionately, what could we do different? And to think about it with your partner
Mhm.
together, I think is beautiful. We're going to celebrate at the weekend.
Mhm.
We're going to have a dinner on Valentine's night at home. We're going to cook it together,
I
and
was gonna say, and if you have children, what a fun holiday to include them on, right? To talk about love and the meaning of love and, to make little things with them or for them. That makes it a little bit more magical when you have young children. But even with teenagers also to gather and say, let's talk about what this day means. And they might roll their eyes. um, but, why do we express love for each other? Because there's so many different ways. I mean, you think about kids in elementary school, they make Valentine's Day boxes and cards for each other, girls and boys, and they have little candied hearts. And they're expressing their hearts to each other at that time. And then as we get older, it becomes about romantic love. And then when we get older again, it becomes more about, filial love and friendships and love for the world. It just keeps expanding. So, what does it mean to you as a couple together? How do you include your families in it? How can you just not make it a Hallmark holiday? So it's just about, buying stuff at the store. I mean, the Valentine stuff was in the stores here in January. It's like they can't get Christmas out of the way fast enough and start loading the shelves with Valentine stuff, so that you start buying things. It's really part of our consumer culture here, at least. And, do you step out of that? Do you step into that? Do you do a little bit of both? So what is it for you? Because I think just you and I giving a bunch of tips and techniques about what to do is not really, it's more of the same.
Yeah, it's about your own opportunity to build a bridge between your heart and your beloved's heart, and to meander back and forth on that bridge together, wondering about how can we take in the view a little bit more
Yeah.
of our relationship.
And I
And
do, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and it's just back to this place, like why do we it's a bit of a heavy one, or a light one, depends what way you look at it. Like, why do we need to love? Like,
Mm,
why do we need to like, why is it important that we welcome love into our own hearts, allow it to be felt by another, to bring it into our family homes? Well, from my experience, even just with people with cardiovascular disease, it is the golden elixir,
mm,
just from
right.
that perspective. And but I'm curious, Doc, for you to, like, why, like, this can be such a celebration. And I love how you brought in the family, the kids, and where there's this whole, on one hand, experience that's on one half educational and the other half experiential.
Mhm.
Why do we need to love?
I don't know, I
And what?
guess what comes to my mind is that we were talking about, that we're predators. We're predators, and we're also wired for empathy and open-heartedness. And, I think our challenge here as we are somewhat destroying the planet is to become more and more integrated. How can we be more open-hearted, keep our prefrontal cortex online and be reasonable and take care of the good of the whole, not just our selfish, predatory ways, which is what animals do. They kill and they eat the meat, and if anybody else comes along, they'll kill them too. And so we're not in that kind of survival mode. So I think Valentine's Day is a good day to bury the hatchet, to, be with elders and children and everybody, and just take a beat, a moment to say, I love you. You matter to me. I care about you. And it's also resetting that intentionality that we spoke about earlier of, I want to be a better person. And in this moment, I can actually exercise that. On this day, I can put aside all my small egoic needs and my hurts and my preferences and expand to be more inclusive with the people that matter to me, or my neighbors for that matter.
Yeah, well, last year it was Valentine's Day, and yeah, it was an intuition I had, and one of my friends who I've known for a while was having a challenging time in their life, let's say, and yeah, I called over and on Valentine's Day, and I was getting I do love orchids, so I was getting an orchid for my
Uh-huh.
wife, and I got her one, and I dropped it over, and her partner wasn't on the island at the time, and it was
Mhm.
just like, I just want to let you know I love you and that you matter to me,
Mm.
and this flower doesn't symbolize it enough, but I just was thinking of you, and this is, and it was just, I was there for 15 minutes. I just dropped in, and it helped deepen the relation. The relationship just took a whole new turn.
Sure.
There was no huge emotional trauma, but I knew there was something imbalanced though, that she was struggling. But just
Right.
that point where and I love that. How can we bring it into the community as well? How can we bring it
Yeah. That
to the home?
somebody cared, somebody thought about her in that moment.
Yeah,
And and I wanted to make sure that we touch on single people here and just how unbelievably awful this holiday can be. Like it's like, okay, this is the night I'm locking myself in my house and I'm not going out because I don't want to see all those people holding hands with their roses and smooching over dinner. I just don't want to see that. So my nephew shared with me that at his work, the day after Valentine's Day, they're having a Palentine celebration. where they, as pals, as friends, are bringing in lunch and having a little celebration for each other. And I just love that notion
Yeah.
that the single people don't have to be in shame or, you know, being made to feel worse because they're not in a relationship yet, that they can embrace each other and themselves and bring it into the community, as you're saying, just a little bit more.
Well, I forget the term now, but 1 week after New Year's Day in Ireland, there's a real old tradition, and it's called like
Mm.
Mother's Christmas. It's called,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
all the women who have been working hard in the
Uh-huh.
Christmas time.
Oh.
They all come together, and it's like the same sort of Valentine that you're
Uh-huh.
talking about. Only it's the 7th of January or something, and they come together just and have a day of pampering or a day of singing or a day of going into the woods together.
I love that. That is so Irish. That's what I love about the Irish.
Mhm. It's
That
no, it's not.
encapsulates the whole
It's
thing.
it's ancient. It's not
Yeah.
carried in money, but in some little pockets in Ireland, that's
Mhm.
still carried out, and it's beautiful. It's for
That
that
is
same
beautiful.
reason. How can we celebrate each other? And any excuse to celebrate, I suppose.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
that
Well,
that.
maybe honor is the better word,
Mm,
right? That we honor the hard work that we have, that we honor that we're all lovers, whether we're in a relationship or not. You know, that we can gather and talk about what we love, right?
yeah.
And share with each other and be in community. That I think is the true spirit of something like this. So I think you and I are talking about how do we expand this definition? How do you not feel colonized by the consumer culture and what you're supposed to do, and make it your own?
Yes. Well, I think you summed it up perfectly there,
Mhm.
and yeah, everybody, just take a moment to notice as you've listened, or whether you're listening on the repeat, what touches you about what we've shared today, what moves you, what feels important, what activates some agency inside of you, and if it's to move towards yourself more, towards the other, bring it out towards your community more, this idea of love, connection, and intimacy, then send us some comments about how that goes for you. And if you're struggling and you need support, please reach out to some of your mental health facilities in your area, or to me or the doc here on our platforms. So thank you, doc, on this sort of, I feel very enriched, and
Yeah,
kind of looking forward to what
Valentine's Day, right?
what I'm taking away from this. Of
Uh-huh.
course, I have a whole lovely idea for Valentine's Day with my wife, but I have this whole new idea of how I'm going to involve my 4.5-year-old
Yeah.
in the process, because we
Right.
color in, we every day we dance, every day we color in,
Uh-huh.
and I've just got this whole idea of a lovely collage that we can do together as a family, where
Sure.
the ethos is love, connection, and in our families, and
Mhm.
extend it out into the community. So thank you for
That's
giving me
great.
that.
Yeah,
That, that
that's beautiful.
it's kind of it's. I'm going to go to sleep soon, and it's going to be percolating in my heart. So thank you for that, and
You're welcome. Thank you.
thank you everybody for taking the time to listen in. If you've got benefit from this, please hit a like or a share, put in a comment. If you know somebody who's struggling, please pass it on. And yeah, we'll see you next week, everybody. Take
Yeah.
care.
Have a
Thanks,
good
Doc.
month, everyone. Bye-bye.